we're all ready now, or I'm ready. I think we need to move on. Good evening, I'm David Potts. I'm the president of the Lents Neighborhood Livability Association, and thank you all of you for coming. Louder. So, wanted to give you a little update on Barb Stuva. I don't know if all of you know her or many of you know her, but she's a longtime member of our group who used to live up at the end of 105th at Mount Scott Boulevard. And she was standing at the back of her car and was hit by another car and pinned between the two cars and ended up crushing both of her legs. And initially they weren't sure that she was even going to survive, but after 6 surgeries, they got one of her legs has a pin in it, and they're kind of waiting to see if the other leg heals up well enough so that they can do surgery on it. Otherwise, she could lose that leg. And in the midst of all of her other woes, she had a stroke while in the hospital, and they can't give her blood thinners until the surgeries are done. So her recovery is going to be a long one. But anyway, she's hanging in there, and we have them in our thoughts. Our group does weekly cleanups at West Rock, and every Saturday morning you can check that, and it's subject to weather permitting. We sometimes, or other commitments, but you can check our website or Facebook page if you wish to join us. We also have Neighbor to Neighbor. We're closely involved with the Neighbor to Neighbor group here at the church. And they're kind enough to allow us to use their facility for our meetings, and the Neighbor to Neighbor group does great things for folks who live here primarily in Lents. If you ever want to check us out, it's the second Saturday of each month at 8:15. We meet for breakfast and then disperse out to help various people out in the neighborhood.
They helped me this last week, and it was wonderful.
We had a lot of fun.
And we're going back next month.
Yep.
We are.
Yeah.
And that one was for yard work, and we're open to all kinds of projects to help our neighbors.
They filled 5 big green bins in like an hour and a half before it started.
It did. We timed that well.
We did. Somebody was watching out for us and kept us dry that day. We also meet for a monthly breakfast at the American Legion Hall, and the next one is the 16th, yes. And we meet there at 9 o'clock, and it benefits the VFW, but it's at the American Legion Hall. And we're not actually members of it, but they reserve us a table, and it's just a place for us to get together and share a meal. And we're all about sharing meals. You notice our meetings always start with food. So we'll get right on to so our first guest speaker, Francesca, is not going to be here tonight because we had such a full schedule, and she decided to reschedule in a couple of months. And you're all set?
I am. Let's hope.
Okay. So
Give it a good thought.
our first guest speaker is Margaret. She's a recruiting assistant for the U.S. Census Bureau, and take it away.
Hi. So, first off, I am impressed. You all, there's so many of you. It's wonderful. Your association is really vibrant, and I'm very impressed by that. So, I am here representing the census. So, the 2020 census, as you know, we are going to count every person living in the United States. And we do this every 10 years. This count is mandated by the Constitution. You guys probably knew that, right? Every 10 years, we must count every person living in the United States. This will be the first year where you'll get the opportunity to reply to the census online. And in March, you will be mailed your census form, and you're encouraged to reply to it online. And that's going to be amazing. So the first census was taken in 1790. So this is the 24th one. And there will be more every 10 years. Remember James Madison, one of our founding fathers? Well, he was in Congress when they were debating the very first census. And this is what his main point about it was. I take it, sir, that in order to accommodate our laws to the real situation of our constituents, we ought to be acquainted with that situation. What does that mean? It means if you're going to make laws that affect people, you better know who those people are. What are their lives like? Who are they? What are their needs? We need to know this stuff. Otherwise, Congress cannot possibly make good laws, right? That's the mandate of the census. And it goes all the way back to the very first census. 1940, this is an example of what a census form looked like back then. Every one of those little rows there was for an entire family, so they were writing like this. Forget that, okay, there's no way you could read that. And also, they were asking questions like, do you have a radio in your house? Now, why would that have been important in 1940?
Communication.
That was high tech. That was cutting edge technology back then, and so they wanted to see whether the people had access to it. By 1960, the question had changed to, do you have a television in your in your house, whatever, not here. Nobody did that. Okay. So, you don't need this one. Okay. So, what will the 2020 census form look like? It's going to look just like this, and it's going to ask questions like, what is your name? What is your birthday? They ask your birthday and your age so that they can make sure that they don't duplicate. Sometimes people might be counted twice, but if we have your name and your birthday, we can make sure we don't double count, which we do not want to do, right? We want to count every person once and in the right place, okay? Everybody. So you'll be receiving materials from us in March and into the first part of April. Census Day is April 1st, and we're going to send you some reminders. Okay, why is it important? Most of you will know this, but the census is, of course, partly about congressional representation, but the biggest impact of the census data is funding. Census data is used to determine where money goes from the federal government. And we would like our tax dollars to come back here and help us, right? Instead of somebody else. And if we miss people, we don't get our money. It's that simple, okay? So everybody here should be on board with the census. So if you want a new school, if you want roads, if you want hospitals, it all depends on the census. Because the money goes where the people are, okay? Also, natural disasters. If the emergency management people use census data to know where the concentrations of people are and what sort of people there are. So, for example, if it's a large senior community, in an emergency, they will know to respond appropriately, which means maybe the seniors are going to need some help getting out, more help than another area. So they can make more intelligent decisions about where to use their resources. Census is important. Okay. Genealogy, how many have used census data for genealogy research? Of course, everybody uses this because after 72 years, the information becomes public. Well, during your lifetime, and the 72 years is because that's the standard lifetime for a person. During your lifetime, the information is kept confidential, strictly confidential. But after that time period, it is released so that people can do genealogical research and find out where their ancestors were, which is really cool. Businesses also use data. At data.census.gov, a business can go and do research and figure out, okay, where do I need to put my next Starbucks or Taco Bell or whatever, and how do I market for a particular area? Well, it matters as to who's living there as to how you might market. So businesses use this stuff. Guess what? The census doesn't miraculously happen. It only works if everybody that possibly can turns in their census form, but we know not everybody's going to, so we have to hire people. And that's what I am here to talk about mostly, is that we have to hire people, and we have to hire people in communities, in the local communities, because that is the best way we can make sure we count everybody, right? Does that make sense to you? If we don't hire people in our local communities, we don't get a good census count, right? So, we are recruiting to fill hundreds of thousands, 800,000 people. And we have to hire them all now. Okay, so, no stress. So the wage for Multnomah and Clackamas County is $18 an hour for a census taker. Okay? It varies by county as to what you're paid, but in these two counties, it's $18 an hour. You get paid every week. The hours are flexible, which means a lot of people take this as a second job, or they take it as if they're retired and they don't want to work a whole lot, they can work 20 hours a week, that's fine. We do that all the time. College students works around their class schedules, okay? And the training is paid for. So here it just says, an enumerator, which is a census taker, is $18 an hour. Now, if you have supervisory experience, you may be hired as a supervisor, and then you get $20 an hour. Okay. There are some jobs in the office, but mostly not. Those are mostly filled. Most jobs are going to be census takers. You do get reimbursed for mileage. Did I say that? You get reimbursed for mileage at 57.5 cents per mile. Okay. You also get paid for all that travel time. So you get paid from the minute you start work, even if that's, leaving your house, driving somewhere, you're paid for all that time. So, not bad. And so I'm here to ask if you could please, apply if you think you're interested. If you think you're interested, name, telephone number, email address, and you're all living in Multnomah, right? So, if you could please, remember, we're hiring thousands, and it is temporary work, so it's not going to be a permanent job for anybody. But if you can help out your community by, working for us for a few months, 20 hours a week, we would really appreciate it, because this job has to be done. You do have to be 18 at least, social security number, citizen, email address, and but it's not like there's, you don't need a resume, you don't need a cover letter. It's an online application. It is incredibly easy. Okay, any questions?
So you mainly just go and
You go to specific houses where people have not completed their census form. You are not going door to door. You go to a specific house. So most of your time is actually spent, what was for me anyway, when I did it back in Texas, was driving. Of course, Texas is huge. But I would get in my car, I would drive to an address, then I would interview people, you're just talking to people, helping them fill out the census form, then you go to the next house. And you're taught exactly what to do. You had a question.
What about the homeless? How do you count them?
We have a whole team devoted to the homeless count. Those people have actually already been hired and are already being trained in exactly how to deal with that. There is a special program, a special what we call operations. Okay, that's a special op for them. There's also a special op for people who live in what we call group housing, which is like nursing homes, prisons, school dormitories. Those are considered group homes. We have a whole team that enumerates those folks, counts them especially. So they're different operations. We are actively hiring people who are bilingual because we do not want to miss anybody because they don't speak English. Actively hiring, and we're doing really well being able to hire bilingual speakers in our area, which means we're making outreach into the right populations. We don't want to miss it.
Yeah, there's a lot of people in this neighborhood.
We've got we've hired Russian speakers, Spanish, Vietnamese, other Asians, Chinese. I mean, we've pretty much got that covered, but we are always looking for more people with those language skills. Again, the census does not discriminate. We want to count everybody, period. If they are here, we want to count them. And we count from the day they're born. Doesn't matter how young, doesn't matter how old, doesn't matter whether they're a citizen, we count. We just count. Any other questions? So the application is online, 2020census.gov/jobs. I hope at least some of you will go ahead and apply. It's not difficult. I can actually help you if you want. I can hang around and help you do that. It's not hard. Any questions about it? Okay, thank you so much for
You're
letting me come.
welcome.
And please, fill out your census.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay, our next segment is going to be about the Portland street response. And would you folks like to introduce yourselves, and the meeting's yours? And okay.
Thank you very much for having us. My name is Matt McNally. I'm the Commissioner Hardesty's Community Outreach Coordinator.
Hi, I'm Kristin Johnson. I'm the Commissioner's Financial Policy Advisor.
Good evening, I'm Bob Cozzie, Director of Portland 911 of the Bureau of Emergency Communications.
I'm Greg Townley. I'm a psychology professor at Portland State and also the research director for the Homelessness Research and Action Collaborative at PSU.
And I'm Tremaine Clayton with Portland Fire and Rescue. I'm the Track Community Health Assessment Team Coordinator that will be piloting the program.
I'm going to pass around what we have, a one-pager that has a lot of basic information about the street response. If you wouldn't mind just grabbing one and passing it along. So what we're going to do today is each of us are just going to speak for a few minutes to try and give you a comprehensive overview of the Portland Street Response pilot, and then we should have plenty of time to answer some questions from you all. So what I'm going to talk about kind of the Commissioner Hardesty's vision and some of the community engagement we did. Kristin's going to talk about internally kind of how the policy was developed at the city. We're going to have Tremaine speak kind of what this will actually look like on the ground out of Portland Fire and Rescue. Bob's going to talk about kind of what it looks like on the dispatch end of the 911 system. And then to finish us out will be Greg, who's going to talk about what kind of metrics and evaluations being done to make sure the program is successful before we go ahead and try to implement this at a larger scale. So I was also Commissioner Hardesty's field director during her campaign, and we actually spent a good amount of time out in East Portland, out in the Lents area, knocking on doors. Something that we heard a lot of was complaints about slow response times when people are calling 911. So if they're reporting a crime and they're feeling like whatever the responder they wanted to show up, whether it's police or fire and ambulance, that they need them to come quicker. So that was kind of the start of kind of sensing a problem. And then looking at some statistics, we saw that since 2013, calls regarding what's quote-unquote unwanted persons, which is usually people that are living on the streets or experiencing a crisis on the streets, that those calls to 911 increased by over 60% over that time. And in 2017, over half the arrests in the city of Portland were people who identified as houseless. So what we found was that there was a gap in the system. The problem was getting worse. Our first response system, which hadn't been updated in a very long time, we were asking first responders that weren't specifically trained to deal with people in crisis on the streets or deal with houselessness to go out and solve that problem. And Commissioner Hardesty believed that this was not a problem that could be solved by the police. And it's also important to realize that the Portland Street Response is not here to solve houselessness. What it is just to address gaps in the first response system. And that's really the mission of the Portland Street Response. So we kind of recognized this gap in the system, wanted to modernize the system, and found that we weren't currently sending the right first responders to the right incidents. In many cases, you call 911, you'll actually get 3 folks to show up. You might get police, fire, and an AMR ambulance, and all of the above may not be what's needed to address that situation. So as we were kind of thinking about, well, what could be an alternative to this, at the same time, there was a really comprehensive report that Street Roots did, which if you're not familiar with Street Roots, they're a nonprofit that employs folks that live on the streets to sell a newspaper and have income opportunities and create community do advocacy work through them. They're a great organization. So they did a really comprehensive report that looked at the cahoots model in Eugene. So this is something that's been in Eugene for, I believe, about 40 years now. Something very similar to what we're proposing with the street response was that what they have in Eugene was they have a van that gets dispatched to certain 911 calls instead of one of the other first response options we're familiar with. And they would be responding to folks that were in crisis, not presenting a threat to anybody, but maybe they're, you see somebody and they're yelling or they're speaking to themselves, or, somebody is setting up, they're trespassing. So nothing that's an imminent danger, but something we could send a different kind of response that could better meet their needs. What we didn't want to do is, in the current system, find that a lot of these kind of lower priority calls are being addressed by police who really can't do much for those folks, and we often end up criminalizing people rather than helping them when they're in crisis. And that goes and creates further barriers, like if they're looking for housing and now they have a criminal record, that's going to make it even harder for them to get the services they need to get off the streets. So that this is kind of the setting of the plate, if you will, and why we saw the problem. We were looking at cahoots in Eugene, we saw the street route support, we teamed up, and we said, let's go ahead and do this. So that's kind of how we developed this pilot program. And to start with, we wanted to do a robust community engagement process, which began a while ago and continues today, as I'll explain. We started out by going directly to the houseless community to find out what their interactions have been like and how they feel about the first response system. And we did that because we felt like it was a unique chance to hear them out. Usually when policy is developed at the city, the first person you go to is usually not the houseless community. So we worked with some advocacy groups to convene some listening sessions. We went out and surveyed folks living on the streets. What we found, there's an extreme lack of trust of people on the streets with the current first response system. And that trust is not good for the safety of everyone involved, police officers, people on the streets. And so we're looking for another option. We also went out, me and Kristin actually went to every single police precinct and spoke with rank and file officers, and found they were very supportive of this idea. So they said that they end up responding to a lot of calls that they don't feel like they need to respond to. And they would rather deal with higher, what the term is acuity, kind of higher priority calls. And so, for example, one officer was saying that he spends almost every morning going around and businesses call him, they say somebody's sleeping in their doorway, and he has to go up, business to business and wake somebody up. We felt like there was a better use of a police officer's time, that there's somebody who could go out in the streets, establish a relationship, and do that kind of work instead of a police officer, which then opens them up to have more of an ability to respond faster to other types of calls. So on top of speaking to the police, on top of speaking to the houseless community, we sent a survey out that went out to business organizations, neighborhood organizations, nonprofits, service providers. We got over 1,000 responses, and continued to show that there was a need for this type of program. People were really excited. We found support from almost every stakeholder you can imagine, from the biggest business interests to people living on the streets, all agreed on this vision that we needed something different. And I just wanted to kind of end my segment here just letting you know that this is a pilot, it's limited, and it's designed to learn so that we can then go ahead and expand it. But one of the things that we're excited about is we've built the pilot to be very flexible and adaptable. So if some of the assumptions that we go into on day one prove out to not be true, we can quickly adapt the program. And we're also continuing to take feedback. So we don't see this launching until the spring, which I think we'll hear a little bit more about kind of the timeline for this. But I'm also going to hand out an evaluation form for folks. And I really appreciate if you fill it out honestly. There's kind of two parts to it. One is I'd like to hear just how you feel, how informative this presentation was, so that we can continue to improve as we go out into Lents and talk to all kinds of groups. But it's also an opportunity for you to share any concerns or ideas you have about the program. So I'm going to hand that out as I throw it over to Kristin, who's going to kind of talk about how the sausage was made within City Hall.
Yes, so the mayor put $500,000 into the budget to help us start up the pilot. So we kind of got the go-ahead to start coming up with an idea. We presented the report at council. Tremaine was there to help report, and that report was accepted. So how did we get there? We had a stakeholder group that had 40 to 50 people. It had representatives from different bureaus at the city, police, fire, BOEC. We had folks from the county, a couple of different county chair and commissioner were there, their staff were there. We had folks from who provide services, from Unity, from Cascadia, who were there. We got input from Central City Concern. We had advocates, folks from Street Roots. So we had a robust stakeholder group representing all kinds of folks in the city to help us think through this. And so to get a program going, we realized that we couldn't work through this with all 40, 50 people all at once. We had to kind of break up into smaller groups. And so we had a bunch of subcommittees to kind of figure out the who, what, when, where, why, and how of it all. And we debated different models and different ways we could do this. And ultimately that coalesced in this big report that we presented and that Tremaine is going to be managing as we go forward. So we've got the pilot money, it's for 1 year. The pilot we're hoping will start in the spring. And I'm gonna let Tremaine really talk about the nuts and bolts of what we're hoping it will look like when we start, and recognizing that where we end in a year could be very different.
Thank you. Again, my name is Tremaine with Portland Fire and Rescue, and I'm super excited about this program just because it really is looking at a different response model. As Matt was saying, and you'll also notice some of the points in the one-page handout, the necessity is talking about those call volumes increasing, and ultimately when this program started, we were looking at the high utilizers, those that are accessing our services, but their needs are still not being met. And so initially the chat program was identifying those people per the call volume and basically reaching out to them to find what really is the underlying cause. When the fire department arrives, we're emergency responders. Quick, immediate threats to life are not found. We realize these are chronic problems. Sometimes it's mental health, sometimes it's a drug addiction. And this is the house community that I'm talking about. And so when we were recognizing those issues, we would respond, we would send them to the hospital. There was no acute need. They would be discharged almost right away. They're calling 911 right away, and that's how our response system is working. So rather than sending our fire crews, because clearly the ladder truck and hose is not doing the trick, I would talk with that person a little bit longer because I'm not in service on one of those emergency response apparatus. And I would be able to understand what those underlying causes are to basically specify that so I can send them to the appropriate service. Oftentimes for the chronic health, it is following up with their primary care, making sure that they are receiving their medications, that they understand their medications. If it's in addiction services, trying to connect them to those services. And again, with behavioral health, these are specific needs. As I was developing that program and trying to find those resources, our homeless population stack of high utilizers was just climbing and climbing. Because we are incident-based, everything, I'm gonna put this down, that's distracting me. Because we're incident-based, and I talk with my hands, I don't wanna put my phone. Because we're incident-based, the follow-up really was going to that address. I could see how many times we've gone on this address, I can knock on the door and most of the time find that person calling. If it was a high utilizer, I go to 4th and Main, it could be anybody here. So really I was telling the crews, when you find this specific person, call me right now, it doesn't matter what time, and I was going to the hospital. I now have that connection. I was able to follow that person and connect them to the services. That specific client that started with led me to Street Roots, and that's how that conversation came about. They were already looking at this system, trying to say, how do we make this system better? When I suggested what I do, plus with my volunteer work with Whitebird, which is the parent company for Cahoots. When they asked me if I knew about Cahoots, I was like, oh my gosh, I never thought I would talk about this and this in the same conversation, because I really do believe that level of service, that in-between service is what's missing. We have a lot of people doing outreach, trying to get those services, but because our system, we don't have enough housing, there's not enough mental health beds, drug beds for addiction services, we're just spinning through the emergency room or spinning through the jail system. And when we don't know what to do, 911, what's your emergency? We come and we just start the cycle over. So really this is just saying 911, what's your emergency? Hold on, we have another service that's going to respond, not outreach, but respond in the moment to see if we can't triage it a little bit more, take care of their needs right then and there, and get them to a place of safety. If it's someone experiencing houselessness, if they're experiencing a crisis, sometimes it is just bringing in some food and water. That brings them down, and then that disruption changes. If it's a chronic health, being a medical specialist, I can then take care of that immediate need. If it is something more severe, we have the resources to patch into dispatch to get the appropriate resources. So that's really what this is looking at doing, taking what we already have and just reapplying it, hopefully more thoughtfully and more purposefully, so that we can actually get the services to those in need. Any questions? Passing that on.
Thank you. So I'm directing the 911 center, and how many of you know the 911 center is in your neighborhood? Yeah, quite a few. We're at Powell 205. And we are invested in this community. We've been here for a very long time. And you know, when I found out that I was going to have the opportunity to help really create this new service to address an issue that we have in our community, I jumped right at it. Not because my boss, Commissioner Hardesty, told me to, but because it's something that I see is going to help in the problem. Is it going to fix everything? No, it doesn't. But we are here to help as best as we can. So what does this look like from the 911 perspective? When you call 911, or when anyone calls 911, or the non-emergency number, the same people at my center are answering the phone. That's why when you call 911, you get answered much more quickly. But a non-emergency line, you hear a phone tree and you have different options that maybe will shunt you off to speak with someone else. And if for one reason or another, you end up having to ask a specific question, you get shunted to one of my dispatchers. Okay, so they're doing double duty. And in those cases, those call takers are answering the phone and triaging based on your need. So if it's a 911 emergency, we're going to answer the phone. 911, what is the location of your emergency? We want to know where this is happening. And then ask a question, something like, tell me the problem. Tell me exactly what's happening. Because this is 911, life or death or immediate crime. We need to know what's happening right then in the moment. Now let's take an example of you're calling on the non-emergency line, or you happen to call 911 and it's not a real 911 emergency. We may transfer you in that case to the non-emergency line, and you'll get another call taker who will then ask what the issue is, what the problem is. Now in most of the calls that we're talking about here, when we are planning on dispatching out Portland Street response, it's not for somebody who is exhibiting any kind of violent behavior. If they're violent, we'll still dispatch police. But a lot of the calls for service that we get are, you know, the unwanted types of calls, or a welfare check type of call, meaning that someone's walking across the street, they're talking to themselves, they don't look like they're in their right mind. And you would call us and ask us to have someone check on them. Now that's perfect for Portland Street response, because right now we're dispatching police on a welfare check. And sometimes, not always, the police officers are really good at what they do, but their job is to alleviate emergency situations. So in those calm circumstances, and police are responding, sometimes things get a little bit ramped up. And we don't want that to happen. We're trying to send the right response under the right circumstances. So Portland Street response in those circumstances can be dispatched in lieu of a police officer. And the welfare of that individual can be checked. And as Tremaine said, they can get in touch with the resources that they need. So I can bore you with tons of details and data, but I like to show this map because this is a map of City of Portland and Multnomah County. And I don't know if you can see that, but all of those dots are homeless-related calls that we received. That's a lot of calls. And they can be anything from a welfare check like I described earlier to a campfire. And fire would respond in those cases. But we've had cases where a campfire has impacted communication systems and telephone networks were damaged and knocked out because of that. When we think about the neighborhood where we're conducting this pilot, the Lents neighborhood is a fire management area for Station 11. It's a little bit challenging for us in the 911 world to equate that to a police precinct because there's numerous precincts that cross this area. So what we've done is in our computer system outline basically the fire management area. And when that call comes in and the call taker enters the information, the East dispatcher, East Portland dispatcher, will know whether or not that's within this particular area. And if it fits the bill for a Portland Street Response call, Portland Street Response will be dispatched. If they're not available, and the call can wait if it's not an emergency type situation, it might just stack up for these guys to go. If it seems like we should be sending someone more quickly, we can still send police or fire, whoever's appropriate in those cases. Is that making sense? What? Yeah.
Now, when you dispatch someone and it's a low incident call, what if by the time they get there, the guy's escalated to some other level of, what do you do at that point?
Yeah, so
At that point, it would just be a matter of an additional triage from our crew to determine if the escalation is something that we would still feel comfortable de-escalating.
Okay.
Because ultimately, that's one of our training
Right.
modes is to de-escalate the situation.
Right.
So long as they don't have weapons, I'm confident with the training that we're receiving that we would be able to de-escalate it. If not, we would then call for additional backup.
Okay.
and if they're not there yet,
Uh-huh.
and the person seems to be escalating, you can always call us back and let us know what's happening, and we'll change the response. Okay. One other little bit of data, if you're interested in this, is for this neighborhood, the Lents neighborhood, we last year handled almost 25,000 homeless-related calls for service. But the lion's share of those, about almost 21,000, were police-related. So that welfare check that I'm talking about, oftentimes. Just because it says police doesn't mean it was a major crime or anything like that happening. That there was some sort of a nexus to homelessness in these statistics. In the grand scheme of things, though, that's about 4.5% of the total calls for service that we handled for this area. So it's a relatively small amount, but here's what we're doing with Portland Street Response. For 4 to 5% of these calls, we're able to send a better response to address the specific situation. Any other questions before I hand it off to Greg?
So you're saying that 4 to 5% of the calls you get may qualify for Portland Street Response?
May, because that's just the number of, in the grand total of the numbers of calls for service we handled last year, 4.5% were related to homelessness. The way we ran that data, because we don't have a homeless type code, okay, if somebody is calling for a welfare check, that would be entered as a welfare check. But what we had to do was dive into our computer system looking for keywords that might have been placed in there. For example, our dispatchers use a lot of abbreviations in their calls, and XIENT for transient is one keyword that we would pull up. Others would be homeless, campfire, a lot of these key phrases that we look for in those calls. And by doing that kind of a deeper dive into our data, we're able to pull up a number of different call types like welfare checks or, you name it, just about anything we would go on. Welfare check is the big one. But even assaults in some cases could have a nexus to homelessness. We would still enter that call as an assault call, but have the terminology or the verbiage somewhere in that call that, it could be a homeless person.
Okay, but an assault call on a homeless person wouldn't be a PSR?
Not if it's violent, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just trying to get a handle about what kind of workload are you able to pass off to PSR? And
Yeah.
what I'm saying is like 5%.
Yeah, 5% of the total call volume could theoretically be Portland Street response. When I look at that kind of data with a pilot and only one Portland Street response unit, you kind of do the math. They're not going to be able to go out on every call, but we are still going to be sending resources to those calls.
We have a high volume of criminals that are in the unhoused, as you call it, or homeless situation. So when we call 911 and we have trespassers or we have people coming onto our properties at night stealing, when they hear that word homeless, we're automatically put through to a different dispatch, which leaves people that have homes kind of in quandary as to how it's going to be responded to. So that's kind of a concern for a lot of my neighbors where I live, and how 911 is going to determine how best to
If you
dispatch
have
those
something
calls.
that is in progress or just occurred, if you know it happened just a minute ago or a couple minutes ago, and you suspect that the suspect is still there or nearby, that is a 911 emergency. If something happened overnight and there's nobody in danger in that moment, that could be the non-emergency situation that I was referring to earlier, that oftentimes is referred to kind of a lower acuity type situation. But if you know that there's someone there breaking into the property or trespassing actively right at that moment, that is a 911 emergency right then and there.
Well, we're finding out a lot of times these criminals are hiding in that homeless situation,
Okay.
and they portray themselves as someone that is just looking for pop bottles, but really they're out trolling our neighborhoods, and we don't find out till later that who they are. So it's just kind of a concern.
Sure.
As far as having 911 dispatch calls that might be of interest, higher interest to police rather than.
Sure, yeah. In those cases, if it's a suspicious person, if they're behaving suspiciously, that's certainly something that we would triage all of those situations. And the typical Portland Street response call is not telling someone who's, and Tremaine, stop me if I'm going down a rabbit hole, but is not trying to stop someone who's behaving suspiciously in a neighborhood. It seems to be canvassing. That would be more appropriate for a police response in that case.
And then I also had a question about the stakeholder and how you determined who was in that stakeholder group, and if there was anyone from neighborhoods other than Street Roots or some of the other businesses. I'm just curious how that was, how you chose the stakeholders.
I want to answer the question, but can we pause that for a second? I'll get right back to that, but I want to give Greg a moment to talk about the evaluation and how we're going to monitor the progress and performance, and then I'll get to your question.
So I'm the data and evaluation guy. We've saved the fun one for the last. Actually, on the way in, Shar was saying that a common frustration with these types of programs is that they aren't rigorously evaluated. There's not data that can help inform what's working and what's not working. And this program is totally different in that regard. From the first day, we were constantly collecting data to inform how this was developed, right? And we got input from a lot of stakeholders, ranging from unhoused individuals to business, to neighborhood associations, to service providers. And all this information gives us a high degree of confidence that what we've developed is going to work. But if it doesn't, we're going to be evaluating it every step of the way to be able to make modifications to it in the field, on the fly, right? So it's going to be really nimble and flexible because we'll constantly have data sources to inform what we're doing. We're going to be providing a midterm report, right? A progress report at 6 months to City Council about what's working and what's not. That'll help them inform the second 6 months, and then we'll do a 1-year report to Council. And the value of that report will both be what worked well, but then also how can we scale this up, right? Once we realize it's successful, how can we make it successful not only in Lents, but throughout the city, right? So you'll see on your handout that we have certain metrics. We'll be working with analysts at Portland Fire and Rescue and Portland Police Bureau to get data points, including reductions in the number of non-warrant arrests that result during a 911 response. As Matt discussed, right, arrests don't reduce homelessness, right? So we want to send the PSR team to be able to help provide people the support they need and connect them with resources, right? That's what we know helps people who are unhoused, not more arrests and criminal backgrounds, right? So along with reductions in the number of non-warrant arrests that result during a 911 response, we also want to see reductions in the number of people transported to the emergency room for non-emergency medical related issues that could instead be addressed in pre-hospital care settings, right? Those are really expensive calls, right? The emergency room calls. We want to be able to treat people in non-emergency settings, right? Portland Street Response will help with that. Reduce the number of behavioral health and non-emergency medical calls traditionally responded to by police and fire, freeing them up to respond to calls that they are more equipped with and trained, and prioritizing calls that are more classically meant for police and fire, right? And have Portland Street Response go to those lower acuity non-medical and behavioral calls and provide the compassionate response that they need, right? Along with these metrics, we also want to collect data to know, again, how's the program working from a variety of perspectives. That's really valuable data. It'll also help us know why the numbers say what they say, right? Numbers in isolation can only say so much. We also want to do interviews with people who are unhoused, asking them, Matt mentioned the report that we did with Street Roots, where we went out and asked unhoused individuals what their needs are from first responders, what they want this program to look like. We will go back for the 6-month progress report and also the 1 year. We will go with Street Roots vendors to ask unhoused individuals what their experiences with the program have been, right? What do they think is working well? What would they like to have tweaked as we refine the program, as we work on scaling it up? We'll also have a process whereby the Portland Street Response staff can ask people in the field what the experience was like. What was the satisfaction? Were they treated with dignity? Was it trauma-informed? We also want to make sure that we're providing support to PSR staff by collecting data about what else they need. What do they need in their bags in terms of resources? What do they need in terms of support? We'll be doing things like assessing job satisfaction, quality of life as it pertains to their occupation, making sure that they're getting the support, knowing that this is going to be potentially stressful for them. We want to make sure that they have what they need to remain diligent in providing a compassionate response to people who need it. We'll also be potentially working with Portland Fire and Rescue to find out, because they can focus on the things that they're really trained to focus on, and that is their traditional priority areas, in freeing up that time, we imagine it might increase their job satisfaction and reduce their burnout rates, right? That there's this designated team to respond to these really high stress calls that they just don't have the training, understandably, to respond to. And we'll be able to see what are their increases in job satisfaction, how are they feeling like they're able to do their job better, right? And help you all out, help the community out by being freed up from responding to some of these calls that just aren't in their wheelhouse, right? We'll also be interviewing business, Lents Neighborhood Association, your association, to find out what's your experience with the program. How's it working? How can we refine it to make it work better for you? And also the people who are calling in to 911, right? And who are using Portland Street Response. How can we get that information from them? And then we might use a variety of ways of doing this. We might map out where most of the PSR calls are being dispatched, and then go throughout neighborhoods, maybe knock on doors and just ask, would you be willing to talk to us about your satisfaction with the program? What worked, what didn't work? We may use community resource centers, neighborhood associations, go into laundromats, places where people are hanging out, where we can ask them, have you had any interactions with Portland Street Response? How do you think it's helping out your neighborhood? How can we make it better? Okay. So we're gonna have a lot of data sources, and we're open to more. So please ask questions about the evaluation. Please, if you have any suggestions, recommendations for how we can make sure that we're getting the information we need, we're open to that. This is still a work in progress. We're still refining what our metrics and outcomes will look like. Yeah.
Are you gonna keep data on the calls that come in after the Portland, because I understand you guys are only working like 8 to 5 or 9 to 5?
10 to 6, but yes.
10 to 6, so are you gonna keep data of the calls that you get after they're off the clock?
Sure, all those are tracked
Okay.
already, and we'll be able to see and compare and see how the calls look different, and the responses are different depending on whether it's Portland Street Response and during those hours or whether it's after hours.
Okay.
And that'll help to know, do we need to change the hours that the team is out? Even while we're doing a pilot, we may realize we need to change those hours. We may realize we need to add an additional team. That'll also help us know for future iterations of this project what hours are most likely to be
Right.
prioritized.
And if I could add on to that, and I think this might address your question. Initially, we were looking at the pilot being downtown in the downtown core, and so the move to Lents was kind of a last minute, so we didn't get as many Lents community members in that stakeholder meeting, but it really was the data that was showing that the timeline in terms of when those calls were occurring, and the fact that they were occurring here, that's kind of where we came up with that hours of operation for the pilot. And then recognizing that we aren't going to meet the call volume. This really is just data gathering tool, the pilot, to see if this type of a program is effective so that we can expand it. We know we're not going to get every single call for service with one team. Being downtown would completely overwhelm that and skew those statistics. So coming out here where the services were limited, we can provide a new service and really measure that with a smaller geographical area and not have that data skewed.
It's a really good point. The data informed the selection of this neighborhood for the pilot. Can we go to someone else?
So if this proves successful, what's your timeline for ramping up? And what, best case scenario from your point of view, what is this force going to look like?
I can help with that. So right now, we're not entirely sure, right? We've got the $500,000 to do the pilot. The mayor has asked all of the public safety bureaus in the city, that's police, fire, 911, PBM, and then the Fire and Police Disability and Retirement Fund, to work together on this work group and come up with 2% savings over the next 3 years. And that looks something like $7.4 million, $7.6 million. A lot of that's going to be reinvested back into public safety in ways we're not quite sure yet. That's going to be a couple of years down the road. If some of that money, if we build a pilot that is successful, and if we can come up with a plan to roll it out through accretion across the city, it's not going to happen overnight. Hopefully some of those resources will be reinvested in the program. So what we do plan to do is, after we've got 6 months worth of data, once we're on the ground, we've got 6 months, we'll have the progress report. At the end of a year of being on the ground with data, we'll have, working with PSU, we'll have a final report with some recommendations on how we roll this out and what that might look like. To finish answering your question, we wanted to center the voices of the houseless in our stakeholder group and include folks who provide care for them, advocates. We included our county partners and we included city staff because we didn't know where this was going to roll out, and because this was a working group in order to get the work done. even if we want to involve a lot of people in all of the neighborhood associations, it wasn't practical to have representation from all of the neighborhood associations on the stakeholder group. But absolutely acknowledging the voices of the community, we did put out a survey to business associations and neighborhood association members to also get some information from folks who live in the community in our house.
I just thought if the data supported that, even that be centered here, that somebody
Yeah.
that was in our area could have been a part of that.
Yeah, so that was sort of a last minute decision. The Lents neighborhood's about 5 square miles. A couple quick important details. We've got one crew to start. That will be Tremaine and somebody who fulfills a second role that may be a social worker, a qualified mental health provider. That's still to be determined. Like Tremaine said, they're not going to be able to answer all of the calls as one team. And one thing that's really important to know is that while they are first responders, they have more luxury to take their time to do what it takes to help de-escalate a person or help them, maybe move them to somewhere that's safer or better for them. And so down in Eugene, they often spend 20 to 40 minutes with any given person on average, whereas current first responders have to be in and out as quickly as they can. So we do want to make sure we're upfront about that and that you understand that while you call, your call could be queued if it's not an emergent situation. But we do look forward to, if this rolls out citywide, finding savings in our public safety system. I believe Eugene has experienced millions of dollars in savings by implementing a similar program. So we do anticipate that in the future as well.
I just want to add on real quick to the question about the timeline for scaling this up. Just want to add that if after people leave this room and they really like this idea, I encourage you to reach out to our colleagues on City Council. We certainly want to see this implemented, responsibly but as timely as possible. So I think it will be helpful for our colleagues to know that the community really supports this and wants to see it happen.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I was curious about response time for PSR. Is it comparable to that of, I guess, a 911 call or a welfare check based on availability? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so response time will vary on how many calls for service they're handling, especially in the pilot, because we'll only have the one unit. And I would imagine that many calls will be stacking up. If they're spending 20 to 40 minutes with each circumstance or each situation, at peak call volumes, many of those calls might be handled by police. That would still be stacked up along with other priority calls that they're having to handle. So it really depends on the time of day, it depends on the circumstances, how many calls for service we're getting. You'd be amazed at how quickly things can shift in the 911 center, where things will be very slow, it's nice and quiet. I walk in and the dispatchers are, they're just kind of chatting or whatever, and then all of a sudden, boom, something happens. And all of a sudden, we'll have 10 new calls for service that are built up. So a lot of that is dependent on the circumstances.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
I have several questions, but I'm glad you're here, and I think this is a great idea, but why was Lents selected as the area?
Yeah, so Kristin can probably answer that, but I know that we had talked about this a little bit earlier. The neighborhood, it was kind of a last minute decision to select Lents because most of the initial expectation was that it would be downtown, but I'll let Kristin.
Yeah, so frankly, our initial assumptions were that was that it would be downtown. We're thinking there are a lot of services downtown. We definitely see an acute need downtown. But then we recognize that for some of those reasons, maybe that's not actually the best place for a pilot, recognizing the limited resources that we have to pilot with. You don't want to just jump into the deep end and feel like you're not seeing any progress, or maybe neighbors feel like you got this service, but I never get my call answered. We wanted to start in an area where we saw a need for service for sure. Folks are further away from services that are downtown, so like Tremaine said, we can bring a new service to them. The geographic area is smaller. It's more manageable, I think, with one team, and we want the community to feel a response. That we want to help make a change that feels palatable, and so we're trying to start smaller, and Lents seemed like a good place to start.
Okay, so then my other question, one of them is for Tremaine, so I'll wait for him to come back. But part of me is fearful that we bring these services out here, they're very helpful to, quote unquote, the homeless community. Word spreads and homeless increases.
Yeah.
And so that is something I don't want. And so how are we going to fulfill that need for the neighborhood?
I'm happy to answer anecdotally. I don't necessarily expect that to happen, but that thought actually has crossed my mind. That if it gains momentum, that it could theoretically attract more people. My hope is that the program will be so successful that it will prove itself out, that it can expand to the rest of the city, so that we don't have that specific issue for the Lents neighborhood in particular, where it could theoretically attract more people here.
How can you call it a success if you're leaving all these people on the street? You need to get the people off the street. It's inhumane to leave them out there.
I completely
So
agree.
this whole program,
Completely
in
agree.
my eyes, isn't doing anything.
Yeah, the program I mentioned earlier, it's not solving the problem.
Well, that's what needs to be addressed.
I agree. It's not
Problem.
solving the problem,
Yeah.
but it is helping us as we navigate through the problem.
And I just want to reiterate on that this is a program designed to fix gaps in the first response system. It is not a program designed to solve houselessness.
Why don't we address the problem? Why are we throwing money away on all these side projects? Why don't we set a place for the homeless? We need mental health facilities. We need jail space for criminals. And then we need to get some of these other people back in the workforce. Yet we're not looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, I know that
I'm
the-
hiring. And I am in food banks and St. Vincent de Paul Emergency Services all the time recruiting. That is my mission, is to be in the food banks.
Right, that's good. I'm glad you're there.
So I recognize your concern. We absolutely need to go upstream and fix the problems and get more housing and more affordable housing for people.
No, that's been a big
And so-
mistake of affordable housing bullshit.
So what I like in this.
People can't afford $1,200 a month rent. I know you think that's affordable, but it's not.
Sir. So what I would like in this program too is, so say you have a famine, right? And you know you need to plant food in order to feed people, right? That's how I see the housing crisis. What this program is going to do is going to be the group that comes in and says, we've got food in our truck, and while your plants grow, we're going to feed you so that you don't starve in the meantime. And so I kind of view this program as that gap, that while we are working really hard, and I know sometimes it doesn't feel like we are, working really hard to get places for people to live, this is going to be that program we're hoping, if we're successful, to kind of bridge that gap while that garden grows.
I think what you need to do is get some people from Eugene that have done this and get them up here to train some people.
You are correct.
Rather than always start
Tremaine-
with a new program.
You're correct. Tremaine can actually speak to
They
that.
have housing in Eugene, don't they?
Well, actually, they have a program, they're using Conestoga huts, right? They're getting
That's fine.
creative, right? It
Better
doesn't
than
qualify, no, you're exactly right. And it doesn't qualify for HUD housing to make that program just automatic because it doesn't qualify as a livable structure as the HUD defines what a structure has.
Right.
But it provides permanent shelter for that transitional period. Cahoots is coming up to Portland. That's why I'm saying I'm so excited about this. I was volunteering with them and I'm seeing what that service does. And I'm saying, why aren't we doing that already? And like I said, this for me is a dream come true. The fact that I see action actually addressing it, because this problem didn't just, we focus on emergency management. We're waiting for the big earthquake. We're waiting for that immediate disaster. And that's where our bread and butter is. This isn't something that we just woke up to. This has been a problem that's been building, so it's gonna take that time to find the individual, help that one person get up today and take care of them, And it's gonna just have to be that slow progress of time. And having these types of programs, there's a lot of types of programs here in Portland, in Multnomah County, the Sheriff's Hope Team, Multnomah County Sheriff's Hope Team, they're out there every day doing these outreaches, and it's just one person a day, but that's one person that didn't go to jail. And if I meet somebody, that's one person that's not going to the emergency department. That money saved is how that gets reinvested for the bigger picture. So it is, I mean, this is one little thing. I'm very confident it's gonna be successful because I've seen people make something out of themselves when they have that dignity, when they have that opportunity. And that's the opportunity we're trying to give them. And that projected health outcome for that individual, they're not calling 911. The fire crews, they're not going on those repetitive calls. We're training, we're available for those emergencies. That's how we as a community build and grow. Because this really is a community. It's gonna take all of our effort to focus on that one person, treat them with dignity so they can get up, right? Because that's really some of the problem that we have is we see the problem, it's not our problem, somebody deal with it. We are dealing with it. Here first and then in the back.
Yeah, so you start this program, it's a magnet, brings in a lot more. You didn't just say, oh, tough luck and leave, and then we deal with the aftermath? Because this has happened, we've seen it. So we're just gonna leave, okay, now things doubled here. Oh, it didn't work, so you leave, and you leave us with nothing. Is this what's gonna happen?
For me personally, as a...
I know you, but I'm talking about the whole program. Oh, this didn't work, so we leave, and we got an increased population here that we didn't ask.
I'm looking at this as my community. When I started with the fire department, I lived here in Lents. I've been in North Portland for the remainder of my career for the last 18 years. When I go to bed, these are still my neighbors and friends and family on the street, okay? So I understand and appreciate that, but that's what I'm saying. This is what I'm doing in my neighborhood to step up, and the fact that I have the platform within the Fire Bureau to hopefully say that we're gonna do this throughout the city. This is just that call to action. I appreciate the frustration with it, but we also have to do something about it, and this is that actionable item. So
That's
I would.
fine if you do something about it, but I'm saying you're gonna say, it doesn't work, then you leave, and we hold them.
What I'm asking you for, sir, personally, is accountability, right? So if you're starting to see that and you're thinking that they're gonna give up, stay honest, right? Because if you don't keep us accountable.
They have seen it already.
Well, but I'm asking you personally, right? This is why we're here, to have these personal conversations. So let's continue this conversation and see what we can do to make sure that it doesn't just go away and then you get stuck with something else.
I see
I
that.
have so I live across the street from Bloomington Park. When a motorhome pulls up and starts parking there or whatever it is, who gets that call? Because it all depends, sometimes some people come, the police will come right away and have them leave, or sometimes the police just leave them there and it's not till I have to call in the middle of the night when they're raising hell, then they'll come and have them. I mean, so what's the transition between your department and, I mean, how are they gonna handle those type of calls? Because the first thing they'll say, are they bothering you? No, not yet, that's my answer. Because you just never know.
Right, and you know, that's, again, we're gonna have to just assess that at the time of the call. I mean, that's part of the purpose of doing the pilot. If you're calling in and you're not getting the response and Portland Street Response goes out, that's part of the analysis. We're gonna evaluate that call. Is this appropriate? And figure that out. When it comes to the vehicles and the camping and the impact reduction, that's I can't remember the title, HERCUP, am I saying it right? That's the reporting information. So that's how we're doing the one point tracking to identify where those vehicles are setting up and where those campsites are. So that's how that would also be another way of reporting. And that's, as we're developing this, we're trying to figure out where all those intersects are going to be for how we can actually receive the call. So if you were to report that through 211, perhaps that does get linked to us directly. Or still, or I'm sorry, 4,000.
Well, what happens is, they never have plates on them, never have plates on them, but that doesn't seem to make a difference in how they respond or how they don't respond. So until I call when there is a problem, or, you know, tell them I'm in fear of my safety, that's usually what kicks them in the butt to start doing something. So I was just curious how those calls are handled. Because I never call 911, I always call non-emergency. Yeah.
Yeah, so the specific response, we're still actually in, we have our training manager working through a lot of those details. They're trying to determine what types of calls are specific to Portland Street Response, what are the circumstances. There's still a lot of questions that we have, which is why the pilot is not, one reason why the pilot is not operational right now. We're trying to work out those details. But that's a really good, or you're providing really good feedback for us as we begin to navigate that process. Because we do want to make sure that, you know, I used the simple example earlier of a welfare check. That's a really common call. And I knew, I was asking my staff ahead of time, send me some scenarios that you can think through that we might be dealing with here, so I could hopefully be prepared for some of your the scenarios that you throw out there. And that specific example never came up.
And living alone, it's scary shit. It's, you know, you never know what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
You know, or they'll attempt to come into my yard, but my gate's real Yankee, so as soon as my dog hears that, they'll start barking, she'll start barking, and then usually they'll go back into the park or whatever.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's just.
Yeah.
I actually have a question for Kristin.
Yeah.
How in the world did they come up with the amount? Because all of you guys are already employed, so you're already on the books, but they're spending $500,000 to roll this out, and I can't understand why. You already have 911, you already have the fire, you know, you already have these people hired except for the social workers, so I don't understand where the rest of the money goes.
That's a great question. Yeah. Right now, as we have the pilot costed out, it's not going to cost the full $500,000.
Well, that's good to
And
know.
the money that's not used will either go into reserve to further pilot, or it'll go back to the general fund if a year from now it doesn't end up expanding. So we do want to hire another position, but we also have a lot of startup costs, right? We need to get a van, we need to get radios, we need to get.
But doesn't the fire department already have those? I mean, Tremaine should have all that, right?
They have the equipment that's in use currently.
Right.
So we're going to borrow a van from another bureau, but we need to put new radios, we need to put new MDT systems in there so that they can interface with the call center and get the calls and see them stacking up. We need to get food and supplies to do the harm reduction stuff in the field, and then we need to hire that staff as well. The money,
for what?
the second staff.
Oh,
person for training.
okay.
Who's
If-
auditing where all this money is going?
The Fire Bureau. It's within the Fire Bureau, and
And you're gonna put those numbers out so we can see where it's
yeah,
going?
we can do that. We have no problem doing that. Absolutely. I'm a financial analyst by trade, and financial transparency is really important to me. And if someone was to email me or call me and ask me, how much have you spent? What have you spent it on? I have no problem sharing that with you.
So I
It's
can,
all
put your,
public
I
data.
can put your information out there for everybody here to.
I'm available. I work for you too. So happy to share that. We have nothing to hide. I promise you that. And like I said, the initial pilot right now isn't estimated to use the full 500,000. And because we want this to be successful, if we find that partway through this pilot that it's working very well, then we have more money to get another team out there, and maybe we could have 2 teams during the pilot. So that's a good question. That's an important question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The hours concern me, and it seems like in our neighborhood, at 6 o'clock, we're just waking up to come to our office. Yeah, truly, so.
Yeah, so
The hours of operations is kind of, to me, weird.
yeah. So a really important part of this. One thing, I had my own assumption. I said, why aren't we doing this at night? Why aren't we doing this on the weekends? I feel like those are when we need them. This is actually aligned to call data. Bob has a robust data system. He's got a wonderful data analyst, or a team of data analysts in his bureau. And surprisingly enough, the most calls to all police, fire, and ambulance are during the day. But what's really important is that if we find that the call volumes are not working, if we're doing this at the wrong time of day or the wrong days of the week, we'll change it. We can switch on a dime. So a lot of this bears out. You kind of just have to get started. And so we're anxious to get started. We look forward to getting started. And then as we go, if we need to change it around, we'll change it around.
One last question. I'm sorry I've asked several, but one of the main concerns that I have in my neighbor, and I have a neighbor that came here tonight from our street. I represent about 35 homes on our street. And the other morning I was going to take my husband to a doctor's appointment, and out in the dark was this child having to walk to school. He has to walk through 92nd down here. And they have the sidewalk blocked, so he has to walk in the street. And they're approaching him as he walks down the street to buy drugs, to different things. And I contact one point of contact and just beg them, please clear the sidewalk so the child doesn't have to walk through the gauntlet. And then they get it cleared out, and then I hear that they're bringing homeless back into the area with potties, with different services, so they can make sure they get services. And it's almost like one point of contact and the police and the different offices are working against one another. And that is what's frustrating about this whole thing. And our kids have to walk through it every single day. They walk through all of that stuff you see on 92nd to get to Flavel. And they are scared. This is a high schooler, which I had to drive down because he was scared to walk through it. So I'm so glad you're here. I know that you're hearing a lot of frustration at times from this area, and you know why, because you work in it all the time. I'm thankful you're here, but please consider people in this neighborhood when you're doing any outreach, or if you're wanting advice, or we're here to help you too. It's not just a criticism.
I think I looked over at Matt, and he was feverishly writing stuff down as you were talking.
I really appreciate anything you can do for us as far as our children are concerned.
The grade school kids walking over Lents, having to walk through all that.
I saw another hand back here, I think. Yeah.
Yes, this was for Tremaine, and I'm sorry you were out of the room when I to talk. What is done if you go out and you're trying to provide services to someone who absolutely refuses your services, but it's a repetitive situation? How will that be handled?
I think, again, it's going to be case by case, and to understand, of all, what is the initial call? So what is the individual doing that prompted the attention in the first place? And then really it's just going to be from that point to decide. I mean, there's a number of assessment tools that we'll be developing with Cahoots in terms of incorporating them into our current Multnomah County protocols. And really a lot of those become a decision tree, so to speak. Not every person is just a one size fits all, but definitely doing those assessment scales to determine what the true threat is. Because unfortunately, I mean, I talk to myself all the time, but there's times where, I mean, people would be like, should I call on you? No, you're not going to call on me. But it's because ultimately that interaction, someone knows I'm safe. I'm having my moment, but I'm safe, right? So if you had that interaction and this person seems like they're not safe, there are definitely tools that will guide us to the safest action to make sure the individual's safe and that our community's safe as a result as well.
And speaking of the mental health problems that I'm sure you're gonna run into, so the information you're gathering on all this mental health, let's just use that for an example. With that information, then you will be reporting it, because we have no mental health agencies per se in Portland, and it's just, we don't. So that information will go where? Will you be feeding that to some Somebody?
Yes, we're developing the partnerships, and then to your point about where it seems like we're fighting ourselves with the services, that's part of this too, is taking away some of those silos and really doing the coordinated efforts. Kind of gearing up into this, I started to participate with the Joint Office of Homeless Services Friday phone call, which is the phone call that more or less coordinates the areas where they're going to be posting and doing the sweeps. I'm not super active in that group because, again, we're not trying to be yet another agency that says, get out. We're trying to have more of a compassionate response, so we don't want to be a trigger just by showing up and they're thinking they're being swept. So that's been a delicate dance to figure out how much involvement you can play in that realm when you know that's their purpose and mission. So really we're starting to look at those service providers, not necessarily the enforcement group, but the service providers within that joint office to figure out at the start of the shift, are there any beds available? Because there are some mental health beds that aren't always in use throughout our city and our system. So if we can have 1 or 2 designated beds, as we're saying, this isn't going to be that quick 5-minute triage, stabilize, and ship them off. This is going to take some time. So theoretically, I might only have 2 or 3 clients throughout the day, depending on the severity. So that 2 or 3 people to get into a bed's a lot easier than saying we have a mental health problem and not enough beds. So again, that's where this individual care, once you were on that site, I know specifically these are the signs and symptoms. These signs and symptoms would be appropriate for this location or that location. Is the bed available? If not, what's a plan B? So we will be working, and that coordination piece is a part of it. It's just a matter of seeing what services are already there and how we could step into that as a helper versus a hindrance. I saw this one and then you.
Yeah,
Or go ahead.
we kind of need to move on.
Okay.
We're,
15 minutes
yeah.
I could speak for myself. I'm happy to stay a little bit longer to ask or answer any individual questions afterwards.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you so much. I'll hang out, and if people can give me those evaluation forms as you head out, that'll be really helpful. And we're going to be in Lents a lot coming up. So this, you can keep coming out to public events, and you'll learn about the progression as we get closer to the launch. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities to be engaged in this. So thanks so much for having us, everybody. It was really great to hear all your questions.
Thank you. All right. Raven Russell will take over now. Sorry that they ran over.
No, that's okay. So I loved all your questions, and it's related to what I'm going to be talking about. So my name is Raven Russell, and I work for an organization called Helping Hands Reentry Outreach Centers. And as a really quick aside, I just want to say in my former life, for 4 years, I was an emergency medical dispatcher, and I dispatched 911 calls. And I would have loved to have a resource like this, because I sent my ambulance to calls that they didn't need to be on. People were not in immediate life-threatening danger, and it tied up resources for people that truly were in life-threatening situations. And so I'm really pleased to see that this is being piloted in our area. So I'm here to talk about the Bybee Lakes Hope Center, which is at the Wapato property. Most of you are going to know the Wapato name. We're not using that name anymore. It's now the Bybee Lakes Hope Center. It's out by Bybee Lake in the Port of Portland, right by the St. John's neighborhood there. And I work for an organization called Helping Hands Reentry Outreach Centers. Currently, we're based on the coast. We were founded by a gentleman named Alan Evans, and Alan was homeless for 27 years. He went into the foster care system at the age of 11 when his dad hung him from a tree, and he was found by a neighbor. And he was placed into an abusive foster care home, which he ran away from at the age of 12. And by the age of 13, he was fully addicted to methamphetamine and spent the next 27 years in and out of drug and addiction and homelessness and the prison system. And he is one of those people on the street that was in crisis and really needed help, and there were not resources available for him at the time. 18 years ago in Seaside, he turned his life around. He got arrested one last time. The police officer asked him, "Tell me your story. I want to hear what brought you to this point." And told him, "You're not a bad guy. You're just a sick guy. So let me help you find the appropriate resources that you need to get out of this situation." So Alan got his ID, got a job, got a truck,
and came back to that police officer and said, I have an idea. I want to start an organization for people just like me that have nowhere to go, that don't have a penny in their pocket, but are ready to get off the street. So the police officer helped him apply for a $1,000 grant from the city of Seaside, and they opened an emergency shelter with 8 beds for men in Seaside. This was 2002. Fast forward now, because I'm giving you the short version since we're a little tight on time. We currently operate in 4 counties. We have 11 facilities serving over 220 unique individuals per night. We offer 2 types of housing. Emergency shelter for folks that are just coming off the street. We're a referral-only program, so local partners refer to us when they come across somebody that is in need. We do a triage over the phone to make sure they're appropriate for our services, because we're not a fix-all for all people. We are intended for people that are ready to make a change to their life and just need help navigating that path. So we accept referrals. People come into the emergency shelter, they spend a few days. We want them to have some time to decompress a little bit, to know where their next meal is coming from, to know they have a safe place to sleep, to have a couple of days to get out of the trauma that they've been experiencing, so that we can talk to them about what our long-term program looks like and make sure it's a good fit for them. That long-term program is called the re-entry program. They are assigned a case manager. They have to take random drug and alcohol testing. So if your color's red and today's red, then today's your day. And we flip a coin so you never know what day it is. It's not on a schedule. And every participant in the long-term program also is required to give 10 hours of community service every week to the nonprofit of their choice or the church organization of their choice. We want them to get out of that mindset where they have nothing to offer and they need everything from our community. We teach them, if you've been in my emergency shelter for 3 days, you have something to teach the person that came in today. So reach your hand back and pull them forward. That's how we work. We develop leadership from within. Our facilities are all managed by graduates of our program with oversight from a regional basis to make sure that everybody that's on the management team knows what it's like. I have the leadership skills, I have the organization skills to be able to run a facility like the large one we're starting in North Portland. I could do it. But I've never been homeless. So any one of those people coming into that facility would be able to look at me and say, you don't know what it's like. And they would be right. So even though I might know what resources I think they're gonna need, I don't know what it feels like. I don't know what that trauma feels like. And if you don't understand what it feels like, you can't relate to somebody and have a trusting relationship with them. And you're absolutely right, it's all about trust. And so if we can establish that trusting relationship with them and say, here's my ugly, show me yours, then we can really get to the root of the problem. And if we can't get to that root of the problem and get to that place where we can have an open conversation about what brought them to homelessness in the first place, whether it's trauma, whether it's addiction, whether it's medical issues or unfortunate circumstances or systemic things that need to change. Right now in our Astoria facility, I have a mother with 2 children, single parent. So she makes $14 an hour because she doesn't have an education. So she's homeless every summer. Why? Daycare is $3.50 per person. So $7 an hour while she's at work is going to daycare. And she makes $14 an hour.
And that's before taxes?
And that's before taxes.
Uh-huh.
So how are you supposed to live on that? So we're identifying these gaps and these problems and helping to bolster other community partners to build up services in these areas so that we can identify what is contributing to this. What can we fix? If somebody's walking down the side of the street, you don't know whether or not you can fix them. But if we can identify the issues that are contributing, if we can reduce the barriers to access to services, then we're going to make a sustainable impact on people. So I'm going to shift now to the Bybee Lake Civic Center. My CEO and I were at a fundraiser for the United Way in Clatsop County. They're a big funder of ours, and they raise about $100,000 every year at a Iron Chef Goes Coastal event. It's a really cool event in November every year. Senator Betsy Johnson and Jordan Schnitzer were celebrity judges at this event. Betsy Johnson has been on our board of directors. Her husband is currently on our board of directors, so we know her personally. And so she came and grabbed me and Alan and said, do you want to meet the guy that was trying to give you some kitchen equipment out of this jail? Sure, Betsy, yeah, we'll come meet him, that's right. So he meets Alan, and he says, tell me your story. So Alan shares his story of what it was like to be homeless for 27 years to somebody who has no concept of what that feels like or looks like. But Jordan may not know what it feels like, but he wants to do something to help. And so the next day, Jordan was sitting around a table in his boardroom with his staff who are frustrated with him because it's been 3 weeks, they tell me this now, it had been 3 weeks since they had already selected a demolition contractor and they still had not signed those dang papers. So Jordan is now sitting in front of these papers and he sets down his pen and he picks up his phone instead and he calls my boss and says, I can't sign these papers. Can you do this? And it's been almost 2 years now since Jordan bought this jail. And he's been trying to help other organizations figure out a way to turn this into housing for the homeless and for addiction services. So Alan says, yeah, I can do that. 2 days later, he makes me clear my schedule, which I was pretty cranky about. He always tells me, I need to show you something. I'm a very black and white kind of person. I'm the list maker. I'm the person that organizes things because Alan's a visionary. So when he tells me that he wants to show me something, historically speaking, that means whatever you want, you can't tell me because it's not logical. So I'm nervous. So he clears my schedule and he pulls me up here to Portland. And we walk through and I am mind blown because I'm expecting a jail. Everybody calls it Wapato jail, right? I've never been in jail, I've never been in prison, so I know from movies what I think that's gonna look like. And I walk into this place and there's not a single jail cell in the whole place except for one. And that's the one that the newspapers like to show a photo of. It's open concept dormitory housing. This building, if I were to imagine what an ideal campus would look like for what we do, this would be it. There are 9 dorms of open concept housing. There are extensive bathroom facilities with stalled showers and stalled toilets, so there's already privacy. There's extensive classroom spaces. There's over 10,000 square feet of office spaces. There's room for a computer lab. There's room for every service there that we could possibly need. There's a medical wing with a full x-ray machine. And this is a building that was built in 2002 and has never housed a single inmate.
We know.
Yeah, we still call it a jail. Yeah, we still call it a jail.
Yeah.
So I would encourage you, please adopt Bybee Lake Soap Center. We don't use the W word anymore. I actually would owe a few dollars for having said it a couple of times because we treat it as a swear word now. But our vision for this is to co-locate services and housing. Because right now, we are asking people who are living in a tent on the side of the road to leave the few belongings they have on this earth to be ransacked, stolen, or swept up. And we're asking them to navigate a public transportation system that is complicated, to get across town to 6 different offices, to keep appointments when they don't even usually have phones to keep track of the time, let alone to get to the bus stops, to get to the offices. We're sending them all over town. And there are great services available in this community, but the access to them for the people that need them is what is lacking. So if we can bring a collaborative approach and get the community partners on site so that when you walk in the door, we do an intake, we figure out exactly what you need from us, and then we say, okay, you don't have health insurance, I want you to go down that hallway, and they're gonna sign you up right now. You don't have identification, I want you to go down that hallway, and they're gonna sign you up and get you the paperwork and help you through it right now. That's our vision, so that we're not trying to ask people to go all over town and leave their belongings and leave their security there when it's not manageable for them. Our initial goal, our arrangement with Jordan, was that if we raised $4 million before the demolition permit expired, then he would allow that permit to expire. And he believes in this enough that he was willing to kick in the first $1 million that we needed. And so then we just had to find 3 more. I've been in development for a few years now. I've done a lot of grant writing. I've done a lot of property acquisitions and renovations, and I'm sitting in his boardroom going, you want me to raise how much money? Okay. But guess what? We're there. Yay. And so, that $4 $4 million was startup costs for a bare minimum renovation just to get the doors open, not making any structural changes to the building, just bare minimum getting all the mechanical stuff up and running for it having not been functional for almost 20 years. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And it also included the first 2 years of operating expenses, because Jordan really wanted us to have that money in the bank so we could make sure we could operate it for a long enough time to undertake a proof of concept period. So we're doing this entirely with private funding. We're not asking for any city money. We're not asking for any county money. We're not asking for any state money for startup or the first 2 years, because we want to prove to our community that this model that works in the 11 facilities that I've got in 4 different counties can be scaled up, that we can bring on the right partners, and that we can get the outcomes that we need to prove that people can make sustainable changes to their life if we provide them with the right access to the right resources and help them along that path. So now that we have the bare minimum funding available and we see that the community is really demanding this, we're raising the bar a little bit, because there is some work that we could do to this building to make it homier and more inviting and more welcoming. So we're gonna put in more windows, because there's not a lot of windows if you're building a minimum security correctional facility, right? So that's gonna require permits, and that's gonna require a lot of contractors. But Hoffman Construction built this building, and they called and said, the gentleman who, it was his first project that he managed, still works for Hoffman, and he called and said, you know, I have always hated that I spent so much blood, sweat, and tears on that building, and it has never been operational. So I'm in, what do you need from me? And we've had architects calling us saying, I'm in, what do you need from me? And we've had lawyers and artists and people that are great with animals calling us and saying, I have skills, can I help? And so we have this huge volunteer base. We've got an advisory board that we've assembled from the Portland area here with legal professionals and public safety professionals and people that are just really invested in this issue. I'm happy to answer. I'm sure you guys have a ton of questions for me, so I'll kind of stop my little short version of my spiel, but I did bring the watercolor renderings that we had commissioned because I think that these really show how you can turn an institutional space with a little bit of paint and a little bit of careful design. You can really transform it into an area that is going to be welcoming for these people. I should say, we're going to phase in operations of the Bybee Lakes Hope Center. We want to open 3 of the 9 available dorms in the first year. That's going to double my organizational capacity, and so we want to make sure we're approaching this in a sustainable way, that we can get the infrastructure in place so that it's going to be a successful program on the long term. Once we get through this proof of concept period for the first 2 years, Jordan is committed to gifting us the property. And so that's a huge asset. It's a huge asset. It's very generous of him. And so we're really excited. The total capacity for the first year with those 3 dorms is 228 beds. The total capacity for the entire building, once as it's currently designed, is 525 beds. But there are areas that we don't need that were built for a jail, like visitation across the glass with the phones. We don't necessarily need that. But that area is right next to the medical wing. And so if the fire marshal says it's cool, we can demo out what was in that space and put in beds for medically fragile folks. So if they're coming in and they're detoxing and they're having some behavioral challenges that go along with that amount of discomfort that they experience through that process, then we can have them have medical supervision. We're also working with OHSU. Their president, Dr. Danny Jacobs, met with my CEO and myself, and they really see a lot of value in their student doctors learning trauma-informed care with hands-on experience. And we are going to have several hundred very traumatized people. So it's mutually beneficial. Our clients get the medical care that they really badly need. Our student doctors learn how to better take care of people who have experienced this level of trauma. That's going to benefit our community as a whole when our doctors understand how to treat trauma. And so there's just really a lot of great partnerships. I would give you more examples, but I know we're short on time. We've gotten an overwhelming number of emails and phone calls from people that are already providing services in the Portland area that want in. And how do we get an office space with you? So if you're one of those people, or if you know somebody who you think should be operating in the Bybee Lakes Hope Center, you can give out my contact information.
Okay.
Char's got it. So feel free to email me or call me. I am open to that. And with that, I'll take questions. Char.
Are you going to hire any of the people we met out at Bybee Lakes when we had the tour? The people that have graduated, do you ever hire people that have graduated from the program?
All of my facilities are managed by graduates of my program.
Okay.
And so many of the folks that you saw in the I Believe shirts are staff members.
Oh, okay.
And they're staff members who have experienced homelessness.
Are they at the coast or the other facilities, or are they going to transfer to Portland? Or
They're at the other facilities right now. They're on the coast. We're going to have that conversation. We're still figuring out who we're going to hire for staffing, but it is a requirement that they have experienced homelessness. They don't have to be a graduate from my program to work at the Bybee Lakes Center. They just have to have experienced homelessness. And so in the management, the facility management and the dorm managers, we have one person who's expressed interest in the facility manager, but we're still accepting. We're gonna publish all of the positions and accept any applicants that are interested in applying.
Did you say referral only?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Would that ever change to drop-in services or anything like
Nope.
that? Referral only?
Referral only.
No, gotcha.
Yep. The reason is we serve family. About 10% of the people that we serve are children under the age of 18. And so we cannot serve registered sex offenders of any class. And so over the phone, we say, are you a registered sex offender? And then as long as they answer no, then they can come on site, as long as they're also ready and willing to be clean and sober, because we operate sober campuses. We have a proprietary database, which I would have spoken about more, but short in time. So that database automatically emails a roster every night with name and date of birth, because we have a release of information signed by every client, to dispatch. And dispatch then runs the people for us to make sure that nobody has a warrant and that nobody's a registered sex offender. That's how we ensure that our facilities are safe. So that structure is in place for a specific reason. So nobody will be coming on site until they have a referral. The other piece is we're gonna have referring partners register as a referring partner with us. Everybody's gonna be required to attend a trauma-informed training on site at Bybee Lakes Hope Center before they're allowed to make referrals to us, because we wanna make sure that from that first person in our chain of custody, they're getting a trauma-informed experience where people are asking them questions in the right way and recognizing how much trauma they've been through.
How are the people going to get to your site once they've been referred and accepted, since it's in kind of a remote area?
Yeah, so
He's gonna send them
just kidding. So we've been working with the TriMet board chair, Bruce Warner. So he's been to several of our open houses and tours, and he actually brought their chief of operations out into that neighborhood to assess where they would be placing additional bus stops. There is a bus stop that's out on Marine Drive, so it's just like 3 blocks up from the center already. So it's actually, there's a bus that goes by a couple times an hour. It's really not that big of a deal. We also operate other facilities that are pretty far removed from town. And for example, in Tillamook, we've got one in the port of Tillamook Bay, and there wasn't bus service there in the beginning, and they didn't see value in adding it in the beginning. So we just bought a bus and had volunteer bus drivers. It took 4 months for the public bus system to go, okay, fine. So now they brought a bus stop to us. So it's not a barrier that we haven't addressed before, and we're not concerned about it, because they're partners that are very interested in helping increase access to services.
Wonderful.
So, oh my gosh, I saw you first. Yeah.
Oh, 3 quick questions. What did you say was the number you think you could house after all 9 dorms were operational?
525 is what the building was built for capacity, but as long as the fire marshal approves, we think we could get up to 550 to 600, just depending on how it all.
But then were you also hinting at if you were able to raise more money to do other remodeling, would that imply even more potential, or is that about the 600 level? Is that kind of
600 is the capacity for that building, but this property is 18 acres, and when they built the jail originally, they built infrastructure underneath for 3 more buildings of the same size. So the property has a 5 to 10 year vision for us of building apartment complexes there so that it would be sort of you graduate from Bybee Lakes Hope Center and you move into a truly affordable apartment, and then can sustain that while still being connected to resources that are on site, just in case you need to periodically check in with your case manager or something like that. And then once they're more stable, then they can move out. Folks typically live with us in our long-term program. If it's somebody who doesn't have a ton of different barriers, then 4 to 6 months. If somebody, a case that's a little bit on the higher end is probably going to be 12 to 14 months, but up to 18 months or longer, we don't cap it. And so that would be the progression. Is we're hoping that we would be able to find an investor, and we're very confident at this point that we would be able to find somebody that would build those apartments.
So then after a couple of years, are you open to money from city, county, state?
We would be willing to have that conversation. We think that we can demonstrate value. We collect a lot of data. We're very data driven with our organization. We're all about transparency as well. And so we would openly share the utilization data from the facility. And if it's something that they're interested in homelessness as a priority, then we believe that they'll buy in because it's going to have the outcomes to prove that it's necessary.
Because one of the things we're really frustrated on in this neighborhood and all of Portland is there's a lot of great ideas, a lot of projects, a lot of pilot programs that are designed for pieces of the puzzle. They attack one piece.
Right.
But we're frustrated that city, county, state is not stepping up to really handle the overarching issue.
Where you're taking the whole person into account and the whole big picture into account, and that's what we specialize in.
Of the homeless crisis. So
Absolutely.
something like what you guys are doing from the earlier presentation, great idea, go forward, do it. But some of the frustration you're feeling in this group is that it's a piece of the puzzle, and we're wondering why there isn't bigger overarching. What you're talking about seems like the potential for a bigger overarching solutions. And,
We agree.
And I'm wondering why city, county, state isn't stepping up to put in a ton of money into stuff like that, as opposed to a ton of money into pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, this particular property has a long history with the city and with the county. And the feasibility studies that have been done were done from the perspective of the county. And so when you're looking as a governmental agency and you're looking at a budget, you would probably tell him this too, Kristin. It's a completely different ballgame from a nonprofit that's doing the same thing. Because we can hold volunteer work parties, we're gonna have some in March, where people can come and help us clean windows and power wash the sidewalks. And once we get to that point, people can help us paint and do that kind of unskilled labor. When you're a government agency, you can't do that. So my budget for pulling this off is vastly, vastly different from what would be if the government tried to do it. So when I say we'd be open to that conversation, that means we're not gonna change what we do when it's working to chase a dollar, ever. We've turned down hundreds of thousands of dollars that we really needed because people wanted us to change our best practices, and it is not in the best interests of the clients for us to change our best practices to chase any dollar. And so we're absolutely open to a partnership with our local municipalities, and we think they do have a vested interest in addressing this as a major big picture solution. But we also know that we have to prove our chops first. We're an organization that's coming in from the coast. We've got almost a 20-year track record, so we've got a really strong track record, but we've never run an organization, a facility of this size. We know we've developed a scalable best practices model, but we're willing to prove it first. And if there are private funders, and there are, in this community that really want to address a big picture issue like this, they're gonna pitch in. And I've had people on PayPal donate $8 to my fundraising campaign because it's all she could afford. And it was every bit of what she could afford. Because people in this community really believe. And I think people really want to be able to do something, do anything to help this crisis. And we really believe this is it.
Makes sense, thank you.
Yeah. Did you have a question?
Yeah. When do you think you'd open?
So we are going to be working through occupancy issues. Our legal team is working on that. They've got 4 different pathways under different state and county ORSs that the city council could really easily approve that. So.
We are adjourned. Thank you all for attending.
And it was our
Yeah.
And if it's not, no housing.
Yeah.
You can't put sick people into well housing and expect them to.
I know these people mean well, but some of these people in my hood on this Breadwater are spending more than $60 a day on methamphetamine or heroin. Multiply that by 30. They make more money than I do.
Well, and that's just it, but they're numbing the trauma
That's
they
right.
experience.
And it's not a matter of money, it's a matter of the addiction just in the way.
Yeah.
And until you solve that problem.
And until you solve
Hi there,
the trauma,
my bosom.
people are going to be ready to catch us.
You know, I think you guys, this is a phenomenal program.
Thank you so much.
Okay, there you go. I gotta go find out. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So their service is attend schools.
Okay.
But I know that they
Okay. Yeah, no, exactly. Get my information from Sean.
the information to contact.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much.
Just out of curiosity,
We have not approached them yet. So if the community wants their elected officials to represent the wants of the community, then it's going to happen. And if it doesn't, then the elected officials have personal preference. And so we need the community to express their support and to be a voice. We need you. We need you to talk to your elected officials and get them to understand.
yeah, likewise, thank you.
Well, that's just it. Yeah. But we're going to get this done, you know, and the community is doing this. So please, spread the word. Come to our events, talk to your elected officials and make sure that they know you want the Bybee something to happen. And we'll get there. So we're confident.
We've been fighting this for 2 months now. Yeah,
I bet.
yeah, because we fought the sale of the property. You hear about the building out now.
You bet. You bet I have.
That was a good move. Yeah, they'll end up having to tear it out.
It's going to be that's the decision.
I'm happy that it works. You know, they have a vision, and it's a drop-in center. That's not us. So it's a necessary part of the hustle. All these low barrier shelters, they're necessary too. They get people on the streets out of really unusual situations. So that they can then something like coming back. It's a step, right? You have to get a step up.
Don't worry about there's fire.
We know, we're not worried about that at all. We are not worried about that at all. Yeah, we don't do outreach. We don't do
I'm sure the city will keep you full.
They will, yeah. In our on-site shows, you might not say you just want to your constituents.
Some of the key members that just
We're armed with the data to back that. So,
Thank you.
of course, thanks for the invitation. It's really great to see you.
I want to talk to her with someone else.
I was just curious. Name tag.
There's a lot of